The air was thick with silence, the kind that creeps into your chest before something unexpected happens. It was a quiet Thursday morning at Jomo Kenyatta International Airport in Nairobi. The terminal was alive with the usual movement. Families, hugging, businessmen checking emails, airport staff rushing between gates. But in the middle of all that, one man stood still, watching the departure screen like time had stopped for him. He wore a simple black t-shirt, travel jeans, and a pair of worn-out sneakers. His luggage was small, just a backpack. Nothing about him screamed importance. And that's exactly how he liked it. His name was Amari Odinga, but few people knew that. To the outside world, he was just another African traveler. But in reality, Amari was the newly elected president of Kenya, returning home quietly after a powerful UN summit in Geneva. He had refused the presidential jet, refused the motorcade, and refused to let the embassy staff pick him up. He believed in something different. Leadership, he always said, isn't about being above the people, it's about being among them. And today, like many other days, he chose to travel alone, like any regular citizen. No press, no special treatment, just peace. As Amari waited at gate 12 for his boarding call, he took a moment to look around. The coffee shop to his left was playing soft jazz. A little girl sat on the floor near her mother, coloring in a book. The gate attendant called out flight numbers over the intercom. Everything seemed normal, but behind that normality, something else was brewing. Just a few rows behind Amari, another traveler paced impatiently, speaking loudly into his phone. His name was Vincent Leclerc, a senior executive for a European development company operating in East Africa. He wore a tailored suit and held a silver briefcase. His voice was sharp and his tone carried weight. "Tell the Kenyan minister we won't wait any longer. If they can't agree to the terms, we'll shift the investment to Rwanda," he snapped before hanging up. People around him tried not to stare, but it was impossible not to notice his confidence or arrogance. Vincent's flight the same. One Amari was waiting to board, was heading to Eldoret, a city that had recently become the center of a multi-billion-dollar energy deal. The deal had been controversial, with environmental concerns, local protests, and political debates dividing opinions. Vincent didn't care much for any of that. For him, it was business, profits, control. As boarding began, passengers lined up in order. Business class first. Vincent moved ahead confidently, handing his boarding pass to the attendant. She smiled, nodded, and let him through. Moments later, Amari stepped forward. The same attendant looked at his boarding pass, then at him, her smile fading slightly. "Excuse me, sir," she said, hesitating. "Could you please wait a moment?" Amari raised an eyebrow, not with anger but curiosity. "Is something wrong?" "I just need to verify something." "One moment," she replied, stepping aside and whispering something to her colleague. The colleague glanced toward Amari, then toward the cabin. A silent judgment passed between them, the kind that slips through in places where class and perception still dictate service. After a pause, the attendant returned with a nervous smile. "I'm sorry, sir. It seems business. Class is overbooked. We may need to move you to economy." Amari looked at her calmly. "That's strange. My seat was confirmed 3A. "Yes, sir, but—" she started before another voice cut in. "Problem here?" Vincent asked, stepping out from the aisle. He looked at Amari for the first time, not recognizing him. "If this is about the seating, maybe let me make it easier. I'll take 3A. He can sit wherever." The attendant chuckled awkwardly, unsure what to say. Amari's expression didn't change. "I'm afraid that won't work," he said softly. "That's my seat." Vincent shrugged, already turning away. "Well, let the staff handle it. I have a meeting to get to." The moment passed, awkward and heavy. Amari was eventually allowed to board and took his seat in 3A. Vincent was given 3B. The two sat side by side, one silent, the other tapping away on his tablet. Neither spoke a word, but the tension between them was thick. Two men on opposite sides of a deeper story, both unaware of what was about to unfold. Half an hour into the flight, turbulence shook the cabin slightly. The flight attendant came by with drinks. Vincent ordered a whiskey, neat. Amari asked for tea. Their glasses clinked softly, the only connection between them. Vincent turned slightly and finally said, "Business or pleasure?" "Neither," Amari replied, sipping his tea. Vincent chuckled. "Then you must be one of those NGO types, flying fancy but preaching simplicity." Amari didn't respond. He looked out the window, the clouds below like soft white waves. Silence returned. But someone a few rows behind recognized him, a young Kenyan woman in her mid-20s, returning home from university abroad. Her eyes widened. She whispered to her neighbor, then checked her phone to confirm. It was him, the president. No security, no entourage, just him, quietly taking insults from a foreign investor without flinching. She didn't say anything. Not yet. But the word would spread. Meanwhile, in Eldoret, preparations were underway. Media trucks, security teams, city officials, all waiting for the president's arrival. But they were expecting him from Nairobi, by military helicopter, not on a regular passenger flight. Back in the sky, the cabin lights dimmed. Most passengers settled into sleep. But Amari stayed awake. Something in his posture had changed. He looked calm, but alert, like a man who knew something others didn't. Vincent, too, had started to sense something. The way some passengers were looking at Amari. The way a few murmured quietly behind their hands. The way the crew had started to grow uneasy. Then came the captain's announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will be landing shortly at Eldoret International Airport. Please prepare for arrival." But no one knew that on the tarmac below, a convoy of black vehicles had started forming. Flags were waving. Soldiers were lining up. A red carpet was being unrolled, and on that plane, 37,000 feet above, Vincent was about to find out that the man he had dismissed just hours earlier was not just a passenger. He was the man the entire country had been waiting for. The wheels of the plane hit the runway with a thud, and a light jerk rippled through the cabin. Seatbelts clicked open as the aircraft slowed, and the usual sound of stretching, zippers, and overhead bins followed. Outside the window, Vincent barely noticed the military vehicles lining the side of the runway. He was too busy replying to emails. Amari, on the other hand, looked out quietly. He didn't move, didn't speak, just watched as the Kenyan flag fluttered softly against the rising sun. He knew what was waiting outside, but the man next to him was still in the dark. The flight crew began their routine, welcoming passengers to Eldoret and thanking them for choosing the airline. Nothing out of the ordinary. But then something changed. One of the crew members walked quickly toward Amari's seat, her voice low but firm as she said, "Sir, please remain seated. Protocol is waiting outside." Vincent raised an eyebrow. "Protocol? For who?" he asked, still not catching on. The attendant didn't answer. Instead, she stepped back and waited. A few rows behind, the whispers began again. Louder this time. Someone had taken out their phone and was recording discreetly. Another passenger muttered, "That's the president, isn't it?" Vincent scoffed. "President of what?" And just then, the cabin door opened. Two men in black suits stepped in first. Tall, silent, scanning every corner of the cabin. Behind them came a group of uniformed officers. Their presence filled the plane with silence. Passengers turned in their seats. Conversation stopped. One of the officers nodded toward Amari and said in Swahili, "Mheshimiwa Rais, tuko tayari." Amari stood up slowly, calm, composed, every movement measured. He didn't say a word to anyone around him, not even to Vincent, who now looked at him with wide, confused eyes. Amari simply grabbed his small backpack, nodded respectfully to the flight crew, and walked down the aisle. As he passed, a few passengers clapped quietly. Some stood in respect and others just watched, stunned by what was unfolding. Outside, the air was warm, buzzing with a different kind of energy. Soldiers saluted as Amari stepped onto the tarmac. Journalists stood behind the barricades, cameras flashing, waiting for the moment. Eldoret's governor, cabinet ministers, and even elders from local communities were lined up to welcome him. It was a reception fit for a head of state. But inside that plane, the realization was just sinking in for Vincent. He stood frozen, the full weight of what had just happened slowly pressing on his chest. That man, that was the president, he whispered to no one in particular. One of the flight attendants nodded, clearly uncomfortable. Yes, President Amari Odinga. Vincent sank back into his seat, his mind racing. Everything he had said, every dismissive look, every assumption. It all played back in his head like a scene from a film, except this wasn't fiction. And now, he was the one being judged. Down below, Amari shook hands with local leaders, exchanged brief greetings, and moved swiftly toward the waiting convoy. He hadn't looked back. Not once. Because this wasn't about proving anything. It was about presence, about what kind of leader he wanted to be, and what kind of message he was silently sending. Meanwhile, in a boardroom across town, a different kind of meeting was about to begin. Activists, community leaders, and environmental groups had gathered to challenge the very deal Vincent's company was pushing. They believed it would displace thousands of families, harm the rivers, and destroy ancestral lands. The project promised jobs and development, but at what cost? Amari was scheduled to speak at that forum. And now his arrival had changed everything. At the same time, back in Nairobi, social media had caught fire. Videos of the airport scene, photos of Amari on the plane, captions like, "Real leadership walks with the people, and he flew like one of us. That's our president." Hashtags like Amari Odinga, President Among Us, and True Kenyan flooded timelines. Young people shared their pride, older citizens remembered simpler days, and critics of the energy deal found new momentum. The story wasn't just local anymore, it was national. But the tension was far from over. At the hotel where Vincent was staying, a quiet meeting was taking place between him and a few high-ranking officials. He was trying to salvage the deal, pushing harder now. "We've come too far to back out," he argued. "Kenya needs this project." One of the officials replied cautiously. "Kenya needs development, yes, but not at the cost of our people." Vincent leaned forward, frustrated. "If your president wants to make a scene, fine, but don't expect the investors to wait around." That sentence was overheard by someone in the hallway, a journalist. Within minutes, it was online. Amari, now preparing for the forum speech, was shown the quote. He didn't react angrily. Instead, he simply said, "Let him speak. I'll respond when it's time." And the time was coming. The hall where the public forum was being held had filled beyond capacity. Elders in traditional attire sat alongside students with protest signs. Journalists set up their cameras. Everyone was waiting to hear what Amari would say, waiting to see if this president would take a side or stay neutral. Vincent arrived too, invited out of formality. He stood near the back, arms crossed, expression unreadable. The room hushed as Amari walked onto the stage. He looked out across the crowd, not just at their faces but into their stories, their land, their future. He stepped up to the mic, paused and let the silence speak first. Then slowly he began to talk, and the whole country leaned in. But what he said next, no one was prepared for. Amari stood still for a moment, letting the silence in the room speak louder than any words could. Then he leaned slightly into the microphone and said, "I came here on a regular flight. No sirens, no protocol, no luxury. Not because I couldn't use those things, but because I wanted to listen, not arrive to be heard." The audience stayed completely silent, every word holding weight. He looked around the room, at the farmers, the elders, the youth holding protest signs, and the businessmen shifting uncomfortably in their seats. He continued, "When I was younger, I watched land being taken, rivers poisoned, promises broken, all in the name of development. I promised myself that if I ever had the chance to make decisions for this country, I would never let our people pay the price for someone else's. Profit. There was a pause, a breath of electricity in the air. Then a low wave of applause began to build. It started from the back, slowly spreading forward until the room was echoing with it. Amari raised his hand gently and the room quieted again. I'm not here to cancel growth. I'm not here to scare away investors. But I am here to say this. Any project in Kenya must be for Kenyans. If it doesn't protect our people, our environment, our future, then it does not belong here. People in the room sat taller. For the first time in a long while, they felt seen. A few elders nodded with quiet pride. Some of the young protesters had tears in their eyes. Even some government officials looked at each other, realizing that the wind had shifted. Then Amari turned toward Vincent, who stood stiff in the back of the room, face frozen. And to our international partners, Amari said without anger, you are welcome here. But your power does not outweigh our dignity. If you come to Kenya, you come with respect. That is not a request. That is a condition. The camera lights blinked faster. Phones were lifted higher. It was the moment the entire country had been waiting for. A president who spoke not from a stage of privilege, but from the heart of the people. Vincent didn't say anything. There was nothing left to say. He turned slowly, walked out of the hall, his face pale, his phone buzzing with unanswered calls. The deal as it stood was finished. His company would have to return to the table, this time with transparency, with community input, and without the attitude of superiority. Later that day, Amari met privately with the young woman from the flight, the one who had recognized him. She was a student studying environmental science. She thanked him for staying calm when it would have been easier to respond with anger. Amari smiled and said, real strength is knowing when to speak, and when to simply show up. By nightfall, the speech had gone viral. News stations replayed the clip again and again. Hashtags flooded timelines. Real leadership. Kenya first. Amari Odinga. People in villages and cities alike shared the story of the plane ride, the forum, and the silent power of staying grounded. But this wasn't just a political moment, it was a cultural one. Something shifted in how people saw themselves, their leaders, and their worth. It wasn't about yelling louder. It was about standing firmer. As the sun set over Eldoret, Amari sat quietly on a wooden bench outside the venue. He looked at the land, listened to the birds, and felt the cool breeze roll over the fields. For him, the work was just beginning, but for the people watching from their homes, their phones, and their hearts, it already felt like something had changed. And just like that, a man who flew with the people became a voice for them, not through speeches or power, but by reminding everyone what leadership should really look like: honest, human, and unshakably rooted in respect.